Hey computer, play About Bees podcast.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back once again to About Bees, Culture,
and Curiosity.
And we're doing a very special extra episode just for our biggest fans. That would be you, whoever you are, listening to us right now. We're glad to have you on board. This special episode is about Christmas, which might explain, Bidzina, what are we doing today? Wearing hats?
Well, today we're going to be talking about a Christmas miracle.
A Christmas miracle. Okay, tell us about the Christmas miracle. What is your Christmas miracle?
Well, it is a Christmas miracle for me because it took me 4 years to figure this out. And just before kind of Christmas Day, that the inventor L.L. Langstroth, Lorenzo Langstroth, was born on December 25th.
Do you know what he's mostly known for? His eureka moment, the thing that he came up with, the thing that revolutionized North American beekeeping, although, to be honest, I think the Europeans had already figured this out a little bit before Langstroth. His discovery was bee space. The 3/8 of an inch that bees need to crawl between two combs or the comb and a wall so that they don't glue it down. If you put a comb, say a piece of foundation, in a beehive, and you have it further than 3/8 of an inch away from a wall, the bees will have to build extra wax in there, maybe even cement the whole thing together in order to be able to get around. Mm-hmm. But if you have it exactly 3/8 of an inch, they will leave that 3/8 of an inch gap. And that was his discovery. He made that discovery by tearing apart colonies of bees looking at all the wax that they naturally built and saw that, yes, they could crawl between two sheets of their own comb as long as that comb was 3/8 of an inch apart. Any closer, they would sew it all together. Any further apart, they'd be building all kinds of bridge comb in between. So his discovery was bee space.
That's that. So 3/8 of an inch, that's not much.
No, that's not much. And you've got to be exact. Well, you don't have to be exactly exact because we realize that in millimeters, it could be anywhere from 6.35 to 9.53 millimeters. And that still will qualify as a bee space in the mind of a bee. So they need that space. If it's further apart, they can't reach from one comb to the other and go across. So they build extra comb and they wedge everything together, make it all sticky and messy. And if you put it too close, then they say, well, I can't squeeze into here, so let's just cement everything together.
Well, that was his eureka moment, as you say, right? Mm-hmm. But you also say that the European beekeepers have figured out Langstroth, his method of beekeeping probably before he did. So how come they didn't figure out bee space before he did?
We never heard of them calling it bee space, but the Greeks were using combs that hung from the top, like top bar hives.
Yeah.
They were using those back in Aristotle's day.
Right.
So they knew how to build these frames that could be pulled out individually or separately, but they didn't put a frame around it. They just had a bar on the top. So, people who like to use the top bar hives, when they pull out a frame, they have to be so careful not to turn it the wrong direction because it'll break off.
Yeah.
That's because it doesn't have a frame all the way around to hold the thing in.
But about the bee space aspect. Yes. Would the European beekeepers know about the bee space?
Well, I guess they did. And Dzierżon, who was Polish, invented a reversible beehive that also had combs that could be pulled out separately inside of frames. Huber, who discovered how queens mate, he was the one who figured it out, but since he was blind from a congenital disease that by the time he was a late teenager, he couldn't see anymore, his wife and assistant did all of the work, and he did all the thinking, and he figured out how the queen bee flies out of the hive to mate. So he had a bunch of experiments that he put together, a bunch of thinking that he had to do, and he told his assistant and his wife how to build what he called the leaf hive. So every comb was like a leaf in a book. It's a page in a book, a leaf. Yeah. And you could turn that leaf and look at both sides of the combs. And so he had that, and they didn't stick together because he made sure there was enough space in between them. And then there was Prokopikin, who was the Ukrainian beekeeper that ran about 10,000 colonies of bees in the early 1800s, and he also had movable frames in his hives. So we give Langstroth all this credit, but it had just never really came to North America. It never, came across with the settlers who were bringing their bees. They didn't bring over the idea of having top bar hives, or like they were coming out of Northern Europe, which was, compared to Southern Europe, was pretty primitive. They were pretty backwards people up there. The English and the Germans, and Swedes and Finns and Norwegians and Irish and Dutch
right.
Okay. I'm just kidding, folks. I don't want to get letters from any of those nationalities saying we were not primitive people. Yeah. We just didn't keep hives the way you guys want to keep bees.
Well, as a North American beekeeper, I know nothing about beekeeping other than how it's done in North America, really. Yeah. And when I watch videos of European beekeepers, I notice their frames are usually bigger.
Yes.
A lot larger, longer.
Except in England.
Yeah,
England uses the national hive, which is a little bit smaller than what we're used to. But when
Oh, it's smaller than the Langstroth.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes.
Okay.
And when I was in southern Hungary and went to a monastery that had been keeping bees and friends of the family and et cetera, but anyhow, I got in there and was given a half day with an elderly monk who should be sainted by now, I hope. And he opened up the beehives, and I remember reaching in and pulling out my first comb in Hungary ever. This would have been 25 years ago or so. So I'm pulling out this comb, and I'm pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling because it was like twice as long as our deeps.
Yeah.
They were really big, deep. And he didn't use honey supers. That particular gentleman didn't use honey supers there at the monastery. Instead, what he had was a system of taking honey off of the outside combs. I should have seen his extractor. I didn't see an extractor while I was there, but can you imagine how big that extractor would have to be to hold frames that you could spin around that were twice as deep as a standard deep frame? Picture that. Picture an extractor to be so big around in order to hold the depth of the frame as you're spinning it. So
it's double the length, but on that frame, would be all honey? It would be no brood?
If it's an outside comb in the sense that it was the furthest away from the brood nest, then you could take it off and use that for your honey and put empties back in on the edge again. There were beekeepers who did that in North America at one time. My father said when he worked in California keeping bees, he worked for a fellow who had all single-story colonies of bees. Yep. And when they produced honey, they would take 3 frames from the outside on each side, that'd be 6 frames altogether, in a 10-frame single-story colony, take those combs out, and they were almost always plugged up with honey. And then they would split the brood nest open in the middle and put empty extracted frames right in the center. And then the queen had somewhere to go again, and the outside frames that used to have brood are now emerging and filling back with honey. So that gentleman never owned honey supers. He would just take the frames out of the deep. And I certainly wouldn't advocate that today, and I wouldn't advocate it anywhere where it gets cold at night, because splitting that brood nest the way they did would have been a serious problem if you have a chill of weather and your brood is split apart and you've put empty combs right in the center.
Right. One thing about that, though, the when you do extract a frame that's, a full frame of honey, and it's nice extraction, all the honeys come out, that is a nice empty frame that gets left behind for the bees or whatever you could do it. But yeah, I think would they like that? Would they like a nice, perfectly drawn out frame? Would they appreciate that? Probably.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kept the queen from swarming because she always had space.
Yeah.
The colony produced about 6 combs of honey every week because this was on a weekly cycle during the flow. So every week they go in. I don't know how long their flows last, but let's say it lasts 4 or 5 weeks. So you'd have 4 or 5 times that you would pull out 6 combs of deep frames of honey. So you're adding up to quite a few supers already, like 2-3 deep supers full of honey. So that was their system there. But I don't want to dismiss all the accomplishments of L.L. Langstroth. So let's look at his life just a little bit. The gentleman was born in 1810. And just to put that in some sort of perspective for most listeners, Darwin was born on Abraham Lincoln's birthday, both of them being born in 1809. So Langstroth was born in 1810. So you can kind of picture that time in history where Abraham Lincoln was, a settler family living on the frontier, as they called it then, of North America and the United States, and Darwin coming from an upper class kind of wealthy family.
There's a rumor Lincoln had a beehive in his hat. That's a bad joke. Bum.
He might have. We don't know that, do we? Or maybe it was in his beard. I always wonder that. Now your beard is getting pretty bushy, so how many bees are you keeping underneath that?
They do, it does protect me from the bees things.
Yeah, it would. I've heard that.
Yeah.
And I've known quite a few beekeepers who were bearded, and they found that was very effective in keeping the bees from getting too close to the skin.
Yeah.
And then they would come home at night, and they would just get a big brush and brush out all the dead bees.
Hopefully not.
So 1810, and what day was he born in 1810?
December 25th.
Whoa, so that makes him a Christmas baby.
That makes him a Christmas baby. It's...
and that's why we're talking about him today on Christmas Day.
That's right.
Right. So this is our special Christmas episode.
Yep. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yep.
It'll be released on the 23rd. So it'll be like a little extra gift for everybody.
Why are we releasing it on the 23rd? Why don't we release it on 25th?
Well, on Monday.
We'll have a different episode on Monday.
But then the 25th following on Wednesday.
Yes.
So then we'd have to. So release just a Christmas special.
Do you want to? I mean, that's
that's totally up to you.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay.
But then we got a New Year's one.
That's right. And we also have a New Year's one.
And New Year's one is also not happening on a Monday. It's happening on a Tuesday.
Right. So we're going to have
4
episodes in 2 weeks. We could certainly try that. I mean, this episode is not being very informative, and it's just for fun, just for people to, maybe it is a bit informative. I think we talked a little bit about the bee space and how important it is to have between 6.35 and 9.53 millimeters as the distance between combs in order to keep that bee space relevant.
So that was accidental genius, a eureka moment that he had?
Okay. I'll back up. Let's just talk about his life a little bit, and then it'll lead to the answer to your question. I think it'll lead right into it. So Langstroth was a very sensitive kid, way too sensitive for a kid born in 1810. And he remembers being scolded by his mom and dad because he would go out into the gravel and get down on his knees when he was like an 8-year-old, which would make it what year?
1818.
He's good with math, too. Look at that. Okay, so around
I almost mixed them up with Lincoln's birthday there.
In that time. So picture the United States is pretty much formed as a country. It's already about 50 years old. So people are starting to kind of get into an Americanism kind of, way of thinking and living. They're pushing out the frontier, constantly taking land. They're doing all these things, including learning about what North America was like. And Langstroth was particularly interested in
There wasn't really the idea of United States at the time, right? Well, I guess it happened, but still, like the concept.
Excuse us, folks. We live in Canada, so we don't really know that much about the United States of America. But
I mean, like the continental United States that we know of today, at that time, it was much smaller. Not much smaller, but
it was quite a bit smaller in a way. In 1803, Jefferson had purchased Louisiana from Napoleon, and that gave Napoleon more money to fight in Europe. And in exchange, Napoleon sent over these beehives that had bee space in them. But they decided that wasn't enough, so they sent them back and they asked for money. And then he wouldn't come up with enough money because he was the one who needed the money. So instead, they gave him money, and he gave the Americans everything from the state of Louisiana north up into Minnesota, all the way across almost to the ocean. It's called the Louisiana Purchase.
Right. The
And
greatest purchase ever made in history.
No, maybe Alaska beat that one.
Right. It was a lot cheaper.
But there was a sense of manifest destiny.
Right. And they still kind of have that a little bit.
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
Except manifest destiny over the last several decades was kind of expanded to be the whole world.
Well, you know what? The recent comments with Donald Trump said,
No,
right?
I don't know. What did he say about taking over Canada and making it the 51st state and making Trudeau our governor?
Trudeau complained that he will bankrupt the Canadian economy if he puts tariffs on us. And then Trump said, well, if you guys can't exist without us, then maybe you should become part of the and this is very like normally Canadians, and you're not Canadian actually.
Yes, I am.
You were born in Canada?
No. I immigrated when I was about 20 years old, and I've got my Canadian citizenship about 40 years ago or so. 30 years ago.
Yeah, like it's a very sensitive topic for a lot of Canadians because, some might say like, new immigrants,
I've been a Canadian citizen longer than you have.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm more Canadian than you are.
Oh, no. No, I mean, as I'm like, I don't fully, I'm a Canadian citizen,
mm-hmm.
but, to me, it's the most rational, almost the rational decision for the Canadian, to create it's a United States, a union, the European Union. Why
mm-hmm.
not create another sort of union in North America? But when you talk to, diehard, like Canadians that are born here or that have had, have family here, raised them, they're totally against the idea.
I am too. I'm totally against the idea of the United States trying to take over any part of Canada because it's extremely different. Everything from culture to education system.
Well, it'd be more like a friendly, hostile takeover.
Well, that's been what's been happening for years and years that our biggest trading partner and a lot of our culture does slip up from the United States and then it infects the Canadian system. But at the same time, we have had a few people from Canada go down to the United States. And
I don't want to get inside of like Trump's head and what he's thinking, but I think what he was referring to, because the United States government has done this before, to the Hawaii. Hawaii was the Kingdom of Hawaii,
mm-hmm.
and they put a bunch of tariffs. There was a lot of business between the two Kingdom of Hawaii and United States. A lot of businessmen, American businessmen there that had, enterprises and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So when tariffs got placed, these American businesses were doing horrible, they were pretty much going bankrupt, just like what Trudeau is referring to what happened to the Canadian economy. And those people, with the help of some local populations, they essentially performed a coup and then formally accepted the United States. So tread carefully, Justin Trudeau, please. Don't ruin the economy too much.
No, I disagree with you and tread carefully. I think that the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, who's a conservative, has taken a very strong attitude against this entire concept of America invading Canada. He has said instead that we're not going to sit still if they put up 25% tariffs on all of our products. What we'll do instead is we'll shut off all the oil going into the United States. And I think that's a fantastic idea because the Americans desperately need the fuel. And if they can't get it from Canada, then they're going to have to be importing more, and prices of energy are going to go up in the United States. So we have a leverage. But I think Trump was just kind of teasing and kind of, saying, if we're that important to you, why don't you just become a state? But Canadians have such a different history and such a different culture that it's something that would be absolutely impossible to be able to see how that could be attained. Yes, the United States did take over Hawaii because of the sugar plantations that were owned by Americans and pineapple plantations and so on. So that was a business deal to get rid of the existing monarchy and system that was in Hawaii for a few hundred years before they were taken over by the U.S. Also, the United States fought the war in 1898 against the Spanish in order to basically take over Cuba and Puerto Rico and the Philippines and Guam. Those were all captured by the United States and became part of the United States. So there's a territory of Guam, which could become a state one day. There's a territory of Puerto Rico, which should also become a state if the people there would want it. I think they're having second thoughts about that one now. So that kind of comes and goes over time. But that's the other thing. The United States Constitution says that first a new acquisition becomes a territory. And then the people in the territory vote whether or not they want to become a state of the United States. So it would take quite a long time, well past the lifetime of someone like Trudeau and maybe even you, before everything like that happened and the Canadian people voted to decide that they wanted to become the 51st state. And of course, that wouldn't make any sense either because we have 10 provinces, each of them bigger than most states. Well, not each of them, but most of them larger than most states in the United States. So
also, if the Republicans are actually serious about this, they also got to remember adding 40 million people, Canadians, to your population means you're adding almost 40 million Democrat voters.
Oh, yeah, let's say about 38 million Democrats and 2 million Republican voters.
Right.
Because even the conservatives up here, for the most part, when we look at people like Doug Ford and others,
they're more center,
open medical,
universal
health care, thank you. Universal health care, good education, big support for universities. So a lot of things that in the United States aren't quite that popular right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
but we kind of went. Yeah, I didn't mean to kind of derail too much.
That's okay. We were talking about the fact that Langstroth was born in a new country that was just expanding and taking over the lands of the Indians.
Yes.
So, yeah. And I don't mean Indians from India. I'm talking about Indians from North America.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a kid, I thought, how do we call these people Indians? Like we had Chief Crowchild in here. How would you feel if some stranger came from another part of the world, landed not even on the continent, but on a couple of islands, and said, I've discovered India, a shortcut to India, and these people here must be all Indians. And that word stuck, you know? So, no, I'd like to use the word Indigenous or Native, Aboriginal. I don't know what, I mean, those terms change with time as we learn more about the background of people, the etymology of the words.
You know, us Georgians, we don't call ourselves Georgian.
No, what do you call yourself?
That wasn't given to us by an Englishman.
Was it?
Yes, because he came and he saw all sorts of statues of St. George. Uh-huh. So he said, oh, these must be the Georgians.
Wow. So what would be like? What?
We say Sakartvelo. Sakartvelo is Georgia. And Kartveliwar. I'm Georgian. No, but Kartveli
yes.
comes from
the Carpathian Mountains.
No, Kartlos.
Kartlos Mountains.
No,
Kartlos Valley.
He was one of the sons of Noah.
No.
Yeah.
Noah had a son named Kartlos.
Yes.
Oh, that sounds so Greek, doesn't it?
I don't know. He was probably Greek himself, but
yeah.
But he had a bunch of sons, and they say that Noah's Ark landed in the Ararat Mountains, which is modern day Armenia, very close to Georgia, and he had spread his seed, and one of his sons had settled in what is Georgia today, and his clan, the Kartlos clan, Kartvelian, is what is Sakartvelo.
I see.
Sakartvelo.
I see. And then then some of his sons took off for North America.
Maybe
became the native indigenous people, and
that's what the Mormons say. That's what the Mormons say.
I don't know anything about the Mormons. I'm not going to discuss what they say. I want to not bring any particular religion's belief into it that is like a group like the Mormons. But
no, I don't even know why I brought it up.
My thought was more about the fact that
I thought that's what
Noah's ship had people come out.
Yes.
And the Kartlos people ended up in Georgia.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we're going to believe that one boat had the entire future of all humanity in it at about 5,000 years ago, those people had to include people of different colors And some of them went to Africa, some of them went to Australia, some of them went to China, some of them went to North America, and some of them went to England, all from that one boat.
I think it was a more local event because, if you read the Bible, they don't talk about giraffes or emus. They never bring up emus.
Yeah, or kangaroos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they were probably just speaking to what was going on locally. I don't think they were referring to the whole world.
Depends on how you read the Bible.
Well, the people that then the people in that region that then took all the information, the Bible, they thought themselves as being the center of the universe, and anything past the Caucasian Mountains and the Iberian Peninsula the Earth was ended.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
But it says that all the people of the earth were killed in the flood. And then Noah was a good man, and he built a big boat.
He built a very big boat, yeah.
A very, very, very big boat, like the size of a couple continents.
Yeah.
And he floated that around for, first of all, a lot of people think, 40 days, you could do that. It rained for 40 days. He floated for a full year. In the Bible, it says that the boat didn't touch ground for a year. Not for 40 days and 40 nights. That's how long it rained to flood the earth.
Yeah.
And that covered the entire earth, every bit of the earth, 100%, totally covered in water, and all the people dead except for Noah and his wife and their multiracial family.
Well, the brain only knows as far as the eye can see. And that
brain only knows. Is that from the Bible too?
Could be.
Could be.
A lot of, this ChatGPT stuff and all this AI bots that we've created.
Yes.
It's all been trained on the Bible because this is the largest amount of collection of work that's publicly available.
No, Shakespeare has more.
Well, Shakespeare as well. They've all this information, but the big portion of it is the Bible.
But look at Wikipedia. There's more in the Wikipedia than there is in the Bible.
I don't know, but what I'm referring to, like the chatbots, because every time I ask it to create stuff for me, it uses this certain words like testament, and it keeps reusing this word. It's a testament, or it's like glory, like these like biblical.
It might be that it knows who it's talking to.
No. It's not only me. Every time I see the word testament in someone's post, I know it's written, because nobody uses that word.
Right.
Nobody ever says that's such a testament. I mean, it's such a old biblical word. But anyways, that's kind of going on another tangent.
It sure is, but this is an interesting one.
And we were going to answer the accidental genius of bee space.
Yes.
You said he had a tough childhood.
Yes. Are we going to get back to bees?
Yeah, because we never answered why the accidental genius because that's what ChatGPT is saying.
Okay.
He didn't initially set out to invent a new type of hive. His breakthrough came when he noticed bees left a gap wide enough to move.
Are you reading something?
Yeah.
Who wrote it?
ChatGPT.
Oh, please don't do that to me. I mean,
well, I'm just saying it's claiming that it's accidental genius.
Does it use the word testament in that statement?
It might somewhere, if I ask
or
it.
Glorify, or heaven on earth, or anything like that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, but that's coming. Okay, go ahead, read it to me. I was just...
No, I was just saying it's just... So I asked it to give me some interesting facts about Langstroth.
Yes.
That would be great for beekeeping podcast.
Oh, my goodness.
And
you're specific on that.
And it said he had accidental genius of bee space.
Accidental genius of bee space.
Or sorry, his figuring out of this new type of beehive came through his bee space idea, his eureka moment, which is, I think, what you said earlier.
Yeah, I'm sure, because I've had a blog for about 25 or 30 years now, and my annual blog posting at Christmas is always on Langstroth.
Wow.
And I use the word eureka moment. So when ChatGPT was doing its research.
No, the eureka moment, I saw that from your blog.
Oh,
it hasn't picked that up on that yet.
Okay, but all right. Okay, let's get back to little Langstroth, though.
Yeah.
So little Lorenzo, I mean, first of all, he's cursed because his parents gave him the name Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth. Like, doesn't that just trip off your tongue like so nicely? So the little kid, he finds that people are not all that interesting to him as a child. I'm making this part up. But anyhow, he got really enthused about insects. And he got scolded. I think I started to get to this point when we got distracted by you, or maybe by me.
It was manifest destiny that distracted.
Okay. So he was on his hands and knees looking at ants. He liked ants. He liked bugs. He liked insects. And especially ants. He was really like you, like he was really into ants, like you were into ants when you were a little kid. Picture yourself being Langstroth at the same age, you know? So little Bidzina there is looking at ants, and he tears his pants several times in the knees, and his parents scold him and tell him not to crawl around looking at ants anymore. So he decided then instead that he would try catching things that flew. So he was catching little bugs like beetles and flies, and he took his collection, because, they were his friends. He took his collection of flies inside of little paper cages that he himself made for the flies.
Wow.
He was 8, 9 years old. And he took them to school. And the teacher felt that it was such a distraction, and maybe she hated insects anyway, and she ripped open, destroyed all these little cages that this little kid had made all by himself and put these bugs inside of as this was his life, this was his hobby. She destroyed that, and she made him go into a cupboard in the school, close the cupboard door, and stay in there until he was willing to come out, apologize, and say that he would not do anything with insects again. He cried and cried. How do I know this? I know this because I have a book here. It's called America's Master of Bee Culture, The Life of L. Langstroth, written by Florence Nail. And it actually has a foreword by my old friend Roger Morse. And this book, which is 200 and some odd pages long, is the life of Langstroth. And it tells about his childhood. It was a horrible childhood, but the teacher won out. So she was able to convince him that he did not want a life with insects, that he should instead become a preacher. So he became a preacher. Okay, so I know these things are true, and I'm not just making them up, although I do have a gift for creativity. This is true because it comes out of a book called America's Master of Bee Culture, a very nice study which kind of puts you into the time and place that Langstroth lived in. And he then, after crying himself to sleep inside that dark little cupboard in the school, he ends up graduating from Yale, which is an Ivy League, big high-class university that prestigious people, even like George W. Bush, had graduated from. So he graduates from there, from Yale, and he goes on to, at the age of 25. Now, when I was 25, I was just running around with a few beehives in the back of a truck. He was offered the job as pastor of the South Church in Andover, Massachusetts, which is this huge, enormous church, a huge church in Andover, Massachusetts. It was like a gift from God that he would be appointed as a pastor of such a beautiful, prestigious, even in those days, which would have been like the 1830s or so, even in those days, that church was 150 years old and now it's over 300 years old. And it was like known as one of the big churches, one of the fundamental basic churches that tied together the new United States of America. So this was a plum assignment. This was a great assignment. This is a huge job for a young man of 25 to take on. So he became a preacher. And apparently he was good, but by the time he was 25 years old or so, he was starting to have some issues. He ends up with a bad condition of manic depressive disorder. So he has a really, really, really melancholy time, which would last for months. And then he'd have to be in a dark room with no sounds and stay in there until he felt like he could come back out again. And then when he was out, he was so full of energy and life and vigor that he could do almost anything in a very short period of time. So he had this horrible life of being depressed and then suddenly so excited that he could hardly control his mission in life.
Now, was he bipolar?
I think it was worse than being bipolar. He had clinical manic depressive disorder, and there was no treatment, no chemicals, no therapies that were known at the time. And he would have these huge bouts of depression where he'd have to cancel his sermons. And people started to feel pretty sorry for him, but they also had a church to run. So they brought in somebody else to work with him, and then eventually he stepped aside. And he took a job as a headmaster at a woman's high school. So he was a teacher then and a principal. And he apparently was very, very good at that too, because he was apparently a nice, kind gentleman, and he was able to teach and be able to manage this school on his good days. But again, the depression would come in. So at one point, somebody came along and invited him to come over to meet him at their house. And they had a bowl full of this beautiful comb honey. And Langstroth said when he saw that comb honey, he'd never seen any food as beautiful, just in form. And you could agree with that. Like comb honey can look so enticing. The form, the color, the scent.
Well, there's something about hexagons that are very inviting.
How is that?
I don't know. There's just something in the formation, when they're in that formation.
Mm-hmm.
It's
so better than squares or circles.
I think anything that's shaped perfectly, humans want to eat.
Oh.
Symmetrical looking things.
That's interesting.
That's why it's really hard to sell uneven fruits and vegetables, because people think it's a disease or whatever when it's perfectly normal.
Wow, you have a good point there.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, that's what's so mesmerizing. You just want to bite your teeth into it.
Well, I know when we were producing comb honey just outside of Calgary, thousands of combs, and some of it was being shipped to Japan.
Wow.
So the country of Japan had stores that wanted to stock our honey. It had to be absolutely flawless. There couldn't be any unfinished cells. There couldn't be any pollen cells inside. That would be a big no-no. It had to be light in color, like very white cappings, no dark spots. So there was a very, very fussy clientele. That's probably not unusual. We couldn't produce enough to make it viable for us. We were able to satisfy what they wanted, but when you consider the shipping costs and sorting through thousands of combs to get a few hundred that would be so perfect that they would satisfy these particular stores that sold it for close to $100 a comb, but it just had to be, like you're describing, the perfectly appealing, beautiful piece of food. And I guess that's true with apples. If we see a blemish in the side of an apple and we're picking them out of a bin, we probably wouldn't take that one. But partly because we realize that, that blemish was probably a spot that's starting to rot early, or there might have been a worm living. Well, hopefully not a worm with all the chemicals that they spray on apples these days, but, there's something was different about it. So, yes, I think you're right. I think I have to agree.
Well, if you ever look at, there's a stomach lining of I think it's probably a goat or maybe a cow. I think all stomach lining has this. Once it's cleaned, it's hexagons.
No.
Yeah. In inner parts, the stomach lining is.
That was in the Bible too, wasn't it? That there was a swarm that lived inside of the lion.
I don't know about that. I haven't never read the Bible, but
I've read it twice. I found it so good the first time that I started over again, read through it the second time. Wow. Seriously, I'm serious about that. It's a fascinating book. It's really interesting to read, how the different authors put things together and just kind of created this history of the Old Testament, and then the New Testament being so different from the Old Testament. Just all these stories. But
when you look at it, it's like It's like
So
not
this is Old Testament that had the swarm inside of the lion.
I see. Well, but like if you look at like stomach, it's like not a perfect hexagon. Like it's not perfectly arranged, like almost like kind of honeycomb, but they're perfect hexagons if you kind of know.
Okay, so if they're not perfectly arranged, we probably wouldn't be eating it.
No, I don't know how to explain it, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll put a picture up. Maybe I could show you if you like.
I think that would be nice. Yeah, let's take a look at that. But I want to get back to poor Lorenzo. So he became a preacher in a very prestigious church. He couldn't hold on to the job because he was suffering very badly from what in those days was called head troubles. So you say he had head troubles. That is an interesting picture that Bidzina has just pulled up here. So that's the outside of a stomach?
That's that will be the inside part where it cleans everything and whatever.
That's the inside, but it looks like it's a solid. Oh, I see.
So it's a lining that
Yeah.
once they cut it out and get the
Yes.
stomach, it shrinks. But once it's stretched out, all these little hexagons
Yes.
are all stretched out.
So cool.
Yeah, and I found that odd. That why is this repeating this shape?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the carbon lattice. If you look at it under a microscope,
Mhm.
it's hexagon.
Mhm.
It's just one of the strongest shapes. The carbon. Diamonds and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. But anyways, it was just something that, when I see this, I
Mhm.
want to eat it. I wouldn't mind eating this. But, well, I like stomach lining anyways.
Okay.
There's a traditional Georgian soup
Mhm.
that gets made with it.
Yeah.
Kind of like,
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Now, Bidzina's got another picture he's showing me off the internet, and that's just like a plate full of €7 per kilo.
Yeah.
Is that right?
it's very healthy for you.
And not very expensive either.
No, it's
I try to avoid eating anything that was once a thinking creature, though.
you're a
That's-
vegetarian?
Not entirely, but I try to avoid, like I eat very, very, very little meat ever.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel bad for the animals. But
What
Lorenzo,
about the little plants, though?
yeah, as far as we know right now, plants probably don't have a nervous system. We had an expert in here on one of our earliest
Yeah.
episodes, and I asked him that question, and he said, "No, there's no nervous system in a plant."
Yeah, but there's been documented incidents where, not incidences, but there's this very frequently documented. There's trees in Africa where during fruiting season or whatever, these bugs
Mhm.
come out to eat on their leaves,
Right.
and then the trees at the end of the whatever forest or wherever the bugs begin,
Right.
they will signal all the other trees that, hey, there's a bug infestation coming. Turn your syrup into this flavor it's bitter,
Yes.
and they alter their state so that they think
Yeah.
and they feel.
Okay. I don't think we can make that conclusion. I don't think we can jump from the fact that a creature is being eaten and then that creates a chemical reaction in the plant without the plant even knowing or thinking about, I'm going to make a chemical reaction. It just occurs, just as photosynthesis occurs without the plant thinking about it. So then that gives off an odor or a chemical. And when a plant encounters that particular odor, like it encounters a lot of smoke, it'll curl up its leaves.
Right.
So it encounters this odor, and that forces the plant to create a bitter chemical inside the leaves so that the insects will quit eating it. Now, that sounds to me like a really great example of completely an evolutionary reaction, that if a forest did not do that, they would get eaten. But if a forest accidentally, because of some mutation in its chemistry, could smell this odor, and then I think an easy experiment would be to take a bottle of that odor into a different forest and spray it around a bit and see if that chemical reaction happens, because then you wouldn't actually have a plant saying, hey guys, I'm getting eaten over here. I think y'all better bitter up.
I don't know, actually, to be honest, that maybe that could happen. But I guess you could take it to even a further extreme. You know, Steve Jobs, he would only eat fruits and vegetables that had fallen off the plant. So you can't pull it. You could only pick it.
Yeah. As weird as he was, I'd have to say he was a good man. Yep. So how about honey? Do you think he ate honey?
Probably be against it.
No, boy. I'm in favor of honey being eaten as long as we leave enough behind for the bees and we try our best not to hurt the poor little creatures. And they're making an excess, so I can kind of justify almost anything that I want to if I work hard enough at thinking about it. So we're back to Langstroth. He was a preacher. Folks, this is going to be a long Christmas episode. I hope you're all buckled in and waiting to hear the end of this story because it's going to go on and on. Oh, You're taking off your hat. I love that hat that you were wearing.
Yeah, it's getting a little...
It's getting a little warm in here, isn't it?
Here. I don't know how we got off.
We are going to get back to Langstroth now.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that Langstroth was a troubled individual. They even had a term in those days, back in the 1800s, that if you had any sort of a mental health issue, they called it head trouble. You know, now he's got trouble in the head. He's got head trouble.
Or he's possessed. Or they're...
No, boy, let's not. I can get so off track with that one. Okay. Yeah. But no, Langstroth suffered a lot from it. And there were times when I guess I was talking about the beautiful honey and how he got started with the bees, but that was during one of his phases when he was feeling like it was coming on again and he was going to have a long time of feeling melancholy and feeling down. So he met this person, saw the honey, and the guy said, well, I keep bees. I've got them up in the attic. They went up to the attic in this friend's house, and the windows were open on this attic, and the bees were flying in and out through the windows. And Langstroth said he finally felt like his life had gone full circle. I mean, he's only in his early 30s, probably about this time. And it was just such a moving experience for him to see these bees at work, which he had never done. And it brought him back to his childhood and that teacher who ripped up his little cages that he had the flies and bugs kept in when he was a little kid in grammar school. And he just wanted to be part of it. So he wanted to have bees. And by the time he left visiting this friend, who probably had a full-time job in sales and marketing, he left with 2 hives of bees that he bought from the guy.
Huh.
So he took them home. And that summer, the depression came on again. And in the fall, he sold the 2 hives because he just felt like he can't do it. He can't take care of anything. He can't run a school because he had to cancel classes. And he quit that job. He couldn't run a church because he couldn't make it to the sermons. And now he couldn't even keep bees because he just had these periods of time when he was so depressed. But the next year, he was given 2 hives of bees again. And he thought, okay, I'm feeling better. I'm going to give this a try. And he did. So it was a few years later with him experimenting and playing with the bees, by about 1850 or so, that he realized this bee space was an essential quality in being able to have a beehive box made in a way that you would be able to manipulate the combs, look after the bees' health, see how much honey is in it without ripping up all the wax like they used to do. They used to just dig in with a shovel and start, big knife, big shovel, or kill all the bees, let them all die they used burning sulfur for years and for centuries. They used burning sulfur to kill beehives. This changed things so much with his discovery. And it was also at a time the Americans went through this really beautiful phase of creativity in what they called a vernacular or a common man or a simplistic style. And instead of having these ornate bee boxes that were the rage in places like England and Germany where they had really intricate designs and wood carvings and everything, plain, simple boxes. And they were trying different kinds of boxes for bees. So the box itself wasn't a novelty, but using frames where each comb was put into a window frame, a little wooden frame, a frame that you could pull out, look at, flip around, put back in. That was new to North America. So that was something then that he invented.
Huh. That's a lot of people have told me that my box are plain and I need to make it more pretty.
Well,
So this is where the tradition comes from of having plain boxes.
it comes from the whole common sense, no frills attitude that Americans and probably Canadians had back in I would say, from the time of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and their very basic common sense philosophy that you do things simply and not extravagantly. And that was from probably the 1820s, 1830s through the 1870s or 80s. A little later on, towards the end of the 19th century, it became more vogue to be gaudy, stylish, which is, I think, unfortunately, a bit in vogue again today with the people living in McMansions and having, shiny, glimmery, fancy-looking things where things have become more important than people.
I think it's got to do with just the flow of money, right? So we have different periods in history where money, the laws of physics, nothing gets destroyed or created, and that's kind of applies to money, and wealth. It just transfers hands, and sometimes we have periods where the wealth has transferred to the wealthy, and we kind of have to start catering towards them and making products that they want to buy, and then the period changes where it's no, we need just no nonsense. We need to get the job done. Like this is so. I don't know if that was a period, because right now I feel like there's a lot of people with money. There's rich people. Well, if you have money, there's so many different things you can spend your ways. Right. And if you're on the lower socioeconomic status, there's not too many options.
I like that point of view, and I think there might be a lot of truth in that. In the late 1880s, it was the time of people like
Victoria era, kind of.
The late Victorian era, and also in North America, there were the robber barons, as they called them, that were big in the rail industries and so on, and it became the family, the John Deere family. Now, John Deere was a simple peasant farmer out there with a plow, and he figured out how to make a better plow. And then he started manufacturing them. And by the end of like 50 years later, the family was fabulously wealthy.
And that was during the end 1800s.
Yes, and there's so many other examples like that, in the hotel business, the trading business, the Astor family, John Astor. There was so many at the end of the 1800s that were so extravagant that they were able to create these huge estates and so on.
Right. I mean, you could get a copper top cover for your beehives now if you like. Yeah, those look pretty fancy.
I guess it depends on what you find important.
Well, if you're if, like you said earlier, if you got 2 beehives and you have endless amounts of money.
Endless amounts of money for your 2 beehives. You're going to treat them like little children, little spoiled children.
Yeah, speaking about that, Langstroth kind of considered he had pet bees. So he kept a few colonies near his home in Philadelphia and often referred to him as his pets. He spent hours observing their behavior and even named some of his queens.
Yeah, he was certainly afflicted.
He was obsessed with the bees.
Yeah, he was obsessed. But that's good because that pulled him out of some of the worst of his troubles. So as we look through, after he made this discovery, then he makes these wooden frames to hold the combs in, spaces them 3/8 of an inch apart. So that was 1851 when he made that invention. Of course, as people did in those days, he went out and patented the idea so that no one else could make it, unless, of course, instead of making it 3/8, which would be 6/16, they went to 5/16 of an inch or 7/16 of an inch and broke his patent because he said, no, I invented this differently. He spent years of his life and the little bit of money that he had trying to defend his patents because they were violated over and over and over again by manufacturers of bee equipment, other beekeepers. I mean, that's not something that you can hold on to. You make something that is so simple and becomes ubiquitous that there's no way that you could hold and sue and, petition against everybody, especially in those days. It was before the time, I think, that some lawyers, not all, some very, very good lawyers in the world, but a number of them today make a good part of their living by doing speculative lawsuits where they say, okay, you think you've been injured, for half of what we can collect, I'll go after these people. In those days, for Langstroth, there wasn't anybody he could turn to and say, I want you to defend my patents for the beehive. And he spent a fortune trying to protect what he had. Okay, so we'll move on a little bit with his life. Because he had invented this beehive in a way that he could manipulate it and make splits and look at how well the queen was doing, look for diseases in the hive, he had suddenly had a window into the colony of bees that really wasn't that accessible to ordinary people in the past. So not only did he have this discovery of bee space, the invention of a new beehive, but he also became the writer of one of the best beekeeping books ever. And I've got a copy, actually I have 2 copies of his book here in front of me.
The Hive and the Honeybee?
The Hive and the Honeybee. He wrote it in 6 months. This book has 400 pages. He wrote the entire book. In 6 months, he couldn't sleep. It was one of his manic phases. So when he was depressed, he had to be in a dark room. They had to take all the books out of the room. If he saw the letter B, it reminded him of bees, and he was stuck in bed and he was in the dark, and it made him feel so much worse that he had to be totally away from the bees. But when he was in his manic phase, which happened in about 1853 or so, he wrote this entire book. Now, I have a copy. I don't have one of his original. This is printed in New York, 3rd edition. Okay, so it's not a 1st edition. 3rd edition, printed in 1861. So this book, printed in 1861, would have been 8 years after he wrote the original. It is an extraordinarily well-organized. I'll hand this over to Bidzina. You can take a quick look at it. 160-year-old book or so. So because that book is ancient and you're not wearing white sterile gloves to flip through it and the acids on your fingers are eating away the pages as we speak, I'm going to give you a modern reprint of the 1853 book. Bidzina, you weren't prepared for this, and we didn't talk about this before, but I'd like you to just flip anywhere near the middle, anywhere in there, and read a paragraph from Langstroth. Langstroth's book, The Hive and the Honeybee, which is now into its 100th edition or something, and it has so many pearls of wisdom that we could still follow and benefit from and learn from even today. Just an amazing book. The guy was an amazing gentleman. So just park yourself somewhere there in the book. Bidzina's been flipping pages, and read a little bit, a few sentences.
I'm a little bit relieved because I thought you were going to give me another book assignment to read.
No. Let's do it right now. We'll do the assignment together right now. Just find something that he wrote.
So I flipped through. So the plain matter of fact, however, is that in our country, as many bees, if not more, die of starvation in their hive as ever were killed by fumes of sulfur.
Even that is a good start. So he's talking about enemies of the bees in this chapter, isn't he?
Yes.
So one of the enemies of the bees would be a beekeeper who allows his bees to starve to death. And he's claiming that more bees die from starvation than have ever died from, and here again, sulfur. Like sulfur being burnt in order to kill the bees, which was a common practice in the days before Langstroth's hives were common. Mm-hmm. So in the old days, you used to keep beehives in skeps or just in wooden boxes or tree trunks or something. And in order to get the honey out, they would actually kill the colony of bees.
Right.
Now, the best way of doing that in England, as an example, was that a person might have 10 skeps. These are the straw boxes, and they would have 10 of those, let's say, just as an example. And they always had a handle on the top that you could lift them up, carry them around by. So you would lift up each of the 10, one after another. And if one was really, really heavy, you would probably kill the bees by putting them over top of a fire that had smoke coming off. So they're not burning, they're not melting, but the smoke from the sulfur is coming up into the hive and it's killing all the bees and they fall out the bottom. And that's the heavy ones. And if any were really, really light, they'd do the same thing because they'd say, well, it's so light, they're not going to have enough food to get through the winter. So that would be like the 2 heaviest ones and the 2 lightest ones. And the other 6 would be kind of in the middle. And they'd say, okay, we're just going to keep those and let them, we're not going to take any honey off them.
Yeah.
We're just going to let them go through winter. And then next year when they swarm, we'll have 10 hives again.
Wow.
Because that was their system. So they had this system where they did almost no beekeeping. They just went through the hives in the fall, sorted them out by the heaviest and the lightest being ones that wouldn't make it through winter, the heaviest ones being the ones that have the most honey that they could harvest and eat for themselves, and they would kill those bees.
So Langstroth was really a Christmas miracle because he really showed humanity of their sins and how to kind of get rid of them. And
that's a good point, yes.
For thousands of years, we've been just
Killing
bees. It's just a living creature, just like killing a cow.
Yeah. So they would kill off the bees in the old days in Northern Europe, particularly, where I'm familiar with the skeps that were kept there. And that was how they kept bees until he came along and said, we don't have to kill them every year.
Yeah.
Instead, we'll put a unit on the top. They put the honey up there. We'll just take that top box off and let the bees down below survive. And we can look at them. And if they're too weak or don't have enough honey, because he's talking about starvation in the passage that you read, then if there's a chance that they will starve to death, then he would put in combs of honey to make sure they didn't starve to death over the winter.
Yeah, which, when you're kind of like a non-beekeeper, it's like, why did they take them so long to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Like it's such not a simple idea, but it's like the chair, the chair's been around for we don't know who invented it. Mm-hmm. Why isn't the bee box also kind of, it's a really recent invention.
It is.
Yeah.
It is a relatively recent invention, except if you look at the ancient Greek hive, which was a top bar hive.
Right, the top bar hive is okay.
But generally people just kept bees in boxes. I think part of it was there was no strong sense of a commercial utilization. They didn't want to commercialize beekeeping because it was just seen as, you've got a sheep, you've got a pig, you've got chickens. This is mostly to support the family. If you have a little bit extra, that's great. You'll sell it to a neighbor that wasn't so lucky that year. And it didn't really matter. You just had a box with bees in, and then every year you'd kill some of the boxes off and then keep some for over winter, and then you had enough honey for the family.
Yeah, if you do that at scale, it's really hard.
Right. Yeah. So at scale, it became important, at least at that time, to have these boxes with frames and like he had invented. We're going to near the end here. Langstroth then has gone through a lot. He's started out as a sensitive kid, really interested in ants, was found to be a very bright youngster, went to Yale, one of the Ivy League schools in the United States, and from there he graduated with a divinity or theology degree and was head of a huge church. So he must have been an outstanding young person. And then the issues with his... But, we tend to look at people who have a disability, like I have my disability, I'm sitting in a wheelchair as we speak. We tend to look at people with disabilities and kind of think, oh, that's too bad, like that's, But sometimes these things help us or teach us or force us into something that we wouldn't have done otherwise. And he might have spent his entire career, his whole life, as a very good, thoughtful, intelligent minister, helping a lot of people and not having anything that really benefited the larger society and people who weren't directly members of his church or whatever. He might have, the world might have missed out if he didn't have these head troubles, as they were called.
Right. It seemed that he was very uncomfortable and he always had an itch. If you're comfortable in your life, you're not going to go on some expedition to find yourself.
Right.
Or what yeah.
Right.
Or if ultimately that's what all these stuff is, right? It's a self journey, and then they come. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we get motivated to do things that if we had a comfortable, easy life, we would have never done.
Yeah, and not to take anything away from a comfortable, easy life, but it just, when you're,
I've always
why would you want to change anything
Mm-hmm.
if everything's good? There's it's unreasonable. It's
Right.
irrational.
I don't feel like people should just inherit a position or a lot of wealth without earning it, without working for it.
Right.
Just because you were born into that family, you are this, and somebody else born into a peasant family is a peasant. That goes really deeply against my inner nature. But on the other hand, I have a lot of appreciation for people who are born into those positions and don't spend all their time just lounging about, but actually look at the world and say, where can I make a difference? Who can I help? What can I do? And I gained a begrudging appreciation for Queen Elizabeth when I looked at her entire life. When World War II was going on, she worked as a mechanic for the army as a young lady. She, in her older age, she was stuck, like she was a representative of an old system. And then I looked at now King Charles, and I thought for years and years and years how difficult it must be to live a life so different from other people where you're not dependent upon feeding a family by the sweat of your own brow and the work that you do. He had an opportunity to just put his feet up and everything would be taken care of.
Yeah.
But yet he didn't totally put his feet up. Like he got
yeah.
involved in a lot of ecological issues. And then his sons, both of them serving in the armed forces and serving as, just ordinary soldiers. And one of them learning to pilot a helicopter, which is not the easiest thing in the world to be able to navigate. And one of them sitting on the front lines was it in Iraq?
I don't know.
Yeah. So when you look at that, and Langstroth then in his situation, he got really curious and interested in this thing called honeybees. He got the bee bug, and he spent a really rough life with these ups and downs, this severe depression and severe mania that he also had.
See, I think his depression could be associated with seasonal depression. We have very long winters in North America. Pennsylvania, I'm sure, would experience that long winter. And I can only imagine how dark things are in 1820 winter of Pennsylvania.
Even during the summer, he could have this problem and have to be locked in a dark room. He needed it to be dark.
It's kind of like Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, a lot of his discoveries happened during the time of his, pretty much he locked himself in a room. And
so he had his manic episodes where he could do a lot in a very short time.
He was getting hassled by his colleagues or ridiculed or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay, fine, I'll show you guys. I don't know if it was a depression, but he went in his room locked himself out. His maid would bring him food. He was rich enough to have a maid and receive food and stuff. But yeah, that's what he did for about 5-6 years. And a lot of his greatest discoveries, he actually figured out the gravitational constant that is still used in formulas today. I don't know what the number is. But yeah, he discovered it, and
G was a joke.
No, yeah, right. It is G. You're right.
It is G.
Yeah. But they use it to fly rockets.
Yes, I can't remember the value. It was something like 6.67 or something.
It's an odd number.
It's
but
whatever it is.
I asked my physics teacher how he figured that out, and the whole class laughed at me. They're like, I don't know. I don't ask that question.
Oh.
But, I still haven't because they use that number to
Chat GPT. Like they're going to tell you how Newton figured out the value of the gravitational constant. Did he actually figure out the numerical value of it, or did he just figure out that
there had to be
a universal value?
I have to verify that. You're right, maybe because you have to calculate this number, right?
Mm-hmm,
you need some supercomputer to do that.
Let's do another quote or another short passage. Flip around through that book again. Anything, anywhere. I don't feel we're doing justice. This is a great book. Bidzina is flipping through a copy of the 1853 version, a very nice copy. I think it was purchased from. I think I got it from Data. I don't remember for sure. Okay,
Okay, so I'm at 185, artificial swarming.
Oh, artificial swarming. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is pretty good. So this is 1853. That's
Yes.
a long time ago.
No, the
Almost
page-
200 years ago.
The page is 185.
And the page is 185. Wow.
So I don't know if
Okay.
it's 1853 though.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
Rapid multiplication of colonies and large harvests of surplus honey cannot, in the very nature of things, be secured in our climate in any one season. If the number of colonies is to be increased to a great extent, then the bees in the apiary will be tasked to do to the utmost in building new comb, as well as rearing brood. For these purposes, they must consume the supply of honey, which under other circumstances they would have stored up, a part of their own use in the main hive, the rest for their owner, and in the space honey boxes. To make this matter perfectly plain, let us suppose a colony to swarm. If the new hive into which swarm is put holds about a bushel, it will require about 2 pounds of wax to fill it with comb, and at least 40 pounds of honey will be used in its manufacture. If the season is favorable, the swarm was large and early, they may gather not only enough to build this comb and to store it with honey sufficient for their own use, but a number of pounds in addition for the benefit of their owner. If the old stock does not swarm again, it will rapidly replenish its numbers, as it has no new comb to build in the main hive, which already contains much honey. It will be able to store up generous allowances in the upper box. These favorable results are all on the supposition that season was ordinarily productive in honey and the hive was so powerful in numbers as be able to swarm early.
Okay, I like that passage a lot. That was again, that's 1853 that he wrote this.
Yeah.
And what he's describing then is still an issue today with a lot of beekeepers, and he's saying that at least in his climate, and it's true almost anywhere in the world, you can't do both. You can't split your hives into a whole bunch of new ones, increase your numbers, and at the same time make bumper crops. You have to kind of focus on one or the other. And he's describing why that's so, in the fact that the bees have to build new comb. Well, if you have comb that you could put into them, that's fine, but that comb had to come from somewhere. Anyway, so he also recognized that to make the 2 pounds of wax that you read about there in a single box that the bees are going to live in, took about 40 pounds of honey just to make that wax. Now, how they knew that, or he figured that out, or that was common knowledge among beekeepers in those days, to me, that's astounding. Like, this was a long, long time. It's almost 200 years ago.
Yes.
So at that time, they already had this notion that you could make artificial swarms, you could split your hive, make more than one, but the caveat there is you're going to make less honey. Anyway, I would say that almost anybody that's a beekeeper would gain some knowledge by reading this book. It is a good book. It is an interesting one. He wrote it such a long time ago, and he wrote it because he had been keeping bees for half a dozen years by then and had been observing, thinking, looking, thinking about them constantly. Bidzina, we're going to kind of go to the end now. I'm going to read a little bit myself here, and this is from my webpage from the Bad Beekeeping blog. It's about Langstroth, and it's my annual Christmas gift to the world. Nowhere near as big or significant as what Langstroth himself did for us. This is, I think, the end of my piece, and it goes like this. Langstroth never found lasting peace from his cycles of manic depression. Though in his 60s, he traveled to Mexico and discovered that the stimulation and change of scenery gave him an unexpected respite from depression. The illness returned when he returned to his home, but he remembered the break from head troubles with great appreciation. He lived long enough, 85 years, to see his work appreciated, his name honored, and his book sell hundreds of thousands of copies. Despite his lifelong disability, he had a long, full life, 3 children, and interesting work, and he made a phenomenal contribution to beekeeping.
Wow.
Yeah, that was quite a life.
It is quite a life.
So we're ending our special Christmas episode, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the recording that we just made, but today is one of those very, very unusual days where Christmas and Hanukkah fall on the same day. So we're celebrating both, and just hope that everybody who's listening is also having a nice, relaxing time.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to our Christmas Miracle episode. Ho, 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 and a Merry
hum, hum.
Christmas.
Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.